This is Homer Flynn, president of the Cryptic Corporation, talking about the residents on the Vinyl Guide.
This episode is brought to you by Groove Washer, the best record cleaners and protective sleeves for your vinyl collection. Ask for the Groove Washer from your local shop or go to groovewasher.com. Discount code VinylGuide10. And now, on with the show.
Oh, well, hey, everyone, it's Nate. Welcome to episode 401 of the Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. And today, people, we've got an incredible guest discussing the rare records of their career, Mr. Homer Flynn of the Cryptic Corporation, the organization that manages the work of the Residents and Ralph Records. Now, there are extremely few people in this world as close as Homer Flynn is to the work of the Residents. So we jumped at this opportunity to discuss the rare records, the recordings, the box sets, Santa Dog, the Beatles, Vileness Fats, and more with Mr. Flynn today. Now, I should let you know the Residents and Cryptic Corporation have been on a mission over the last few years to preserve the works of the Residents in what may be their ultimate form, the preserved editions. These are available at Cherry Red Records, cherryred.co.uk. These are deep dive box sets for albums like Meet the Residents, Third Reich and Roll, Fingerprints, Duck Stab, and Not Available. And those are all available from Cherry Red Records or from ordering from your local record shop. However, on July 7th, 2 more preserved releases will be available. A 2LP set for Eskimo and a 2LP set for the Residents commercial album. These are some of the preeminent works of the band The Residents, and they're available July 7th. Head over to cherryred.co.uk to get yours on the way, or talk to your local record shop about getting them ordered in for you. Finally, I do have to let you know we have an extended version of this interview available at patreon.com/vinylguide. That's where I put all our extra stuff. We do our own preserved versions of each episode of the podcast, like last week's conversation with Mark Maron, episode 400. Everyone got the main dish on the RSS feed through the local podcast apps, but the Patreon supporters got so much more. Not only did they get the main interview, they got more of the interview as it was extended, plus it was commercial free, plus it was high resolution, and they even got the video version of the interview at patreon.com/vinylguide. We also had a Patreon party over Zoom, so please consider supporting the Vinyl Guide podcast at patreon.com/vinylguide. You'll not only keep us going, but you'll also get to enjoy all the extras. And with that, let's get into today's conversation with Mr. Homer Flynn of the Cryptic Corporation, discussing the work of the Residents. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this week on the Vinyl Guide, we've got a very special guest, Mr. Homer Flynn, president of the Cryptic Corporation. And we're going to talk about all sorts of things, including the upcoming release on Cherry Red Records, 2 additional preserved edition album packages from the Residents. Eskimo is coming out. I think that's a double 12-inch, as well as the commercial album. They are set to complement the existing preserved releases, including Meet the Residents, Fingerprints, Not Available, and more. Homer, thank you very much for joining us here on the show.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, happy to be here.
Now, it must be strange and maybe even a little bittersweet to be putting some of these packages together. As I understand, there was originally some thoughts, even 30, 40 years ago, of doing box sets of packages like Fingerprints and whatnot. And to now finally see this coming together, are these kind of completing the vision that you had back in the 70s and early 80s?
Well, maybe in some ways, although the box sets, the ideas that I had back then, they weren't so much expanded albums the way these things are now. I often say, the Third Reich and Roll box set, I don't know if you ever saw one or not.
There were 20, the one where 25 were made, and
yeah, exactly. And I often say it was the worst idea I ever had. Strictly because it was a beautiful thing once it was actually done, but it was really just too work intensive. And you know, we actually got, I think the original intention may have been 100 of each, and that was going to be 100, Meet the Residents, Third Reich and Roll, and Fingerprints, something like that. And we actually had all those boxes made. We had
300 something.
yeah, we had a room with 300 boxes in it, and ultimately we did 25 in order to fulfill the people that had actually ordered them. And I made the statement at that point, though, never again. Once again, it was a beautiful thing, but it was just too work intensive. But now, I'm not doing the work. Cherry Red is doing the work. So,
as I understand, that original Third Reich and Roll box set sent you to the hospital with a paint inhalation of some sort.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you should say that. It didn't. It didn't actually send me to the hospital. But what happened was that we had these boxes and we were spray painting them, and it was like, I think we were using like automobile lacquer or something like that to these boxes, and so we are dressed head to toe in coveralls and gas mask, and at that time my hair was really long and I wanted to keep my hair out of the way, so I put a rubber band around my head to keep my hair down. After about an hour of all of this stuff, I had the most incredible splitting headache. And I thought, oh my God, am I breathing the fumes from this shit? Whenever I've got to stop. And so we just stopped, took everything off. Well, basically, the rubber band was cutting off circulation to my head or something. As soon as I pulled the rubber band off, everything was okay. I didn't quite go to the hospital. Maybe if I hadn't taken the rubber band off, maybe I would have wound up in the hospital. I don't know.
Okay. So yeah, that's a bit of an urban legend around the box sets. And I can understand why you didn't want to make any more after that. What always struck me very interesting about the Residents, I'm a bit of a pack rat myself. I'm a collector and I tend to hang on to things. The Residents seem to be of a very similar ilk. Materials from the last several decades seem to be hung on to, or at least I understand the existence of within the Ralph Records archive and whatnot. Can you share a little bit about the Ralph Records archive? What's in there, how large it is, and give us a bit of a peek?
Hardy Fox, my former partner, unfortunately, Hardy died almost 5 years ago. But he was the keeper of the music archive. I was the keeper of the art and more costume archive. And shortly after, he announced to me, really somewhat unexpectedly, in 2015 that he wanted to retire. He wanted out, and I was very much caught off guard. And I spent all of 2016 looking for some way to enable his retirement and enable my ongoing career with the Residents, because I had no desire to retire. And at the end of that time, I found two new partners, which was Cherry Red in London and MVD in the States. And shortly after that stuff got settled, I get an email or a phone call or something from Hardy saying, okay, you have to come pick up the archive now. I'm going, huh? And so it's like I had to hire 3 guys in a truck to go up to Hardy's place. It was 100 boxes. And
that's just tapes, right? You said music. That's just tapes and stuff, right?
No, I didn't really know at the time what all of it was. And it turned out that roughly 20 or 25 boxes of it were tapes. The other 75, 80 boxes was product. And the thing is, if you're talking about, Hardy, anytime something new would come out, he would put a box of 25 aside. And so if you're talking about 25 original Meet the Residents or Third Reich and Roll or something, well, I mean, that stuff is gold. If you're talking about 25 CD second or third re-releases of Fingerprints in the mid to late 80s. Well, we're starting to look like hoarding at that point. And ultimately, I had just completed, where I am right now. You can't really see it, but this is my basement of my house in San Francisco, which was completely falling apart about 7 or 8 years ago. And actually, we had to redo the foundation. When we redid the foundation, we also built a really nice studio down here for me, with some storage space, in one end of it. That storage space just went like that. All of a sudden, it was all sucked up, and I'm going, "Oh my God, what am I going to do with all this shit?" And around that time, Cherry Red started putting out the re-release series, and Richard and I, product manager at Cherry Red, started talking, and that's when we started realizing how much really interesting material was on all these tapes. And that's when we started shipping tapes off to Scott, the guy in Seattle, and then he started digitizing them, and so ultimately it turned out to be a real boon. Still trying to get rid of the mid 80 CDs, so I can regain a little space in my archive.
So you had products, finished shrink wrap boxes of shrink wrap products from throughout the career. There were tapes.
Yeah.
You have things. Do you still have original set pieces for the Mole tour, things like that around?
There is the isolated thing here and there, but the reality is that there's too much of that stuff.
Yeah,
just too much stuff of it. I'd have to have a warehouse the size of an airplane hangar or something to have kept all that stuff in. And there are the isolated item here and there, but not that much.
Okay. Well, are there residence recordings that are missing out of the archive? Anything that was destroyed or lost long ago?
The only thing that immediately comes to mind that I haven't been able to find, Meet the Residents was originally recorded on 4-track, and I have not been able to find any original multi-track recordings of that. That's the only thing that I have noted that I haven't been able to find.
So you've got the original tapes of the Santa Dog sessions all secure in the archive.
Yeah, well, I mean, Santa Dog predates Meet the Residents. So what I have in terms of original Santa Dog recordings, I'm not really sure. There hasn't been any reason to look that stuff up that I can think of. It wouldn't surprise me if it's not there, but I can't really answer that.
Right. Okay. All right. How about the Warner or the WB album? Is that original package from Hal?
Yeah. No, I have that. I'm trying to think.
By the way, we're probably getting very nerdy. Let me just, people who are listening, just so they know, sure. Back in, I think it was 71 or so, the band wasn't named Residents at the time. Were you guys going by the name the Delta Nudes or something else?
Well, the Delta Nudes, there was no name for the Residents at that point. Mm-hmm. And they kind of went back and forth looking for names forever. And then what happened was that Warner Brothers album was submitted to a guy named Hal Halverstad. Hal was, I think, a marketing director for Warner Brothers Music at that time. And so the Residents, reading Rolling Stone, saw that they were big Captain Beefheart fans at that time. And they read that Beefheart was getting ready to go out on tour. And when he got ready to go on tour, he didn't go to the A&R people at the record label. He went to Hal Halverstad. And so the Residents kind of thought, well, if he's good enough for Captain Beefheart, maybe there's just some kind of connection there. So they actually sent a card, like a postcard, to Hal Halverstadt, that was like an ad for themselves that kind of echoed ads that Warner Brothers was doing at that time. And then at the bottom of it, it says something like, you know, oh, you sound interesting, but we're very busy right now. Go away. Or here's a check for $50,000. Or another box is like, please send tapes and/or demos to blank 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 Hal Halverstadt, Warner Brothers Records, and he had actually filled that in. So at that point,
the door was open.
Yeah, the door was open, and everybody went crazy, and they started taking a bunch of what was loose tapes at that time, and editing and overdubbing and whatever, and turned that into the Warner Brothers album. And that original Warner Brothers album is here somewhere. There may be more than one copy at this point. I'm not really sure.
Right. And as I understand, it was delivered to Hal Halverstadt. The band name wasn't clear at that point. So
no, and he sent it back to Residents. Residents were living in San Mateo, California, about 20, 25 miles south of San Francisco. That's where they were living at that time. And so when he mailed it back, he sent it to Residents, 167 and a half 17th Avenue, something like that, San Mateo. And they kind of went, well, once again, if it's good enough for Hal, it's good enough for us. So at that point, they felt like Hal Halverstadt had named them.
The name The Residents came from that. So you have that original return package. For years, there were bootlegs of that recording that were circulated. And the rumor is that there was a tape of the Warner Brothers album that was removed, perhaps stolen from the Cryptic Corporation. Any truth to that rumor?
There were bootlegs that got out that, shall we say, we were not happy about. And there were a couple of different things. When we had a guy who took care of the studio for us when the Residents were on tour, back in the 80s, I think. And we heard at some point later that he copied a lot of stuff. But then there was another guy that kind of was a guy who was a DJ in Portland, who's one of the first ones that started playing the Residents. And he came down and one point and showed up and kind of made friends and stuff. And I think they gave some of those copies of some of those tapes to him. And I heard at some point later he was selling those tapes or bootlegging them or something. So I know there are a couple of different sources where things quite possibly got out.
Okay. So Santa Dog, that has such an interesting story. What was the concept that was envisioned for Santa Dog?
Well, honestly, the concept was to put out a record more than anything else. And the Residents' first studio, which was on Sycamore Street in the Mission District in San Francisco. And this building had been had a printing press in there. They had printed a magazine called Western Kennel World. It was a doggy magazine. And when the Residents went in there, it almost looked like the people that were printing the magazine had just walked out 2 days before and never gone back. So there was all of this doggy stuff, including a photo of Santa Dog.
That's where the image of Santa Dog came. You just found it within the papers.
It was just among all the junk that was in that studio. I mean, that studio had a huge printing press in it, and the people that they rented the building from had to remove that press so they could, build their own studio and whatever. And I remember it seemed like it took weeks, and there was some old black guy with a sledgehammer that came in and just completely tore that printing press apart. But the other artwork that you're referring to from Santa Dog, it was some kind of clip art, like holiday greetings or insurance company or some kind of clip art, and residents had the idea of pairing that with the Santa Dog photo for the package.
So when you went to print the record, you made, I believe there were 2 7-inch records, 500 units of each one. How many of the 500 actually saw light of day and were mailed out?
Well, 500 was the original idea, I think, but those covers are actually hand printed silk screens, and so the residents had actually set up almost like a clothesline or something. Their studio at that point, the top floor in the center had one really large open space under a skylight. And so they had these lines stretched out through that space to where the silk screens could dry. Mm-hmm. And at one point, one of those lines collapsed. It's like, too much weight, too much hanging on that at one time. And so probably 100 to 150 of them, something like that, got ruined because when they fell, they were wet, and then they fell on top of each other and smeared. And so they were no good. So nobody knows what the exact number is. I think the best guess is around 350, 375, something like that. That's what actually got done. And they were trying to send them to anybody that they could think of. I mean, they were sending them to friends and family, of course, but they sent one to Richard Nixon, which I think was refused by the White House, and it came back. And they sent one to Frank Zappa. They sent them to everybody they could think of.
Did you ever hear back, or did the residents ever hear back about someone who'd actually received it, someone notable they sent it to that acknowledged they had it at some point?
Honestly, not that I can recall. And the thing is, it wasn't very easy to find people's addresses back then. I mean, there's no telling how many of them just went from the post office, into the garbage or whatever.
And I've seen the one that was refused from Nixon. In fact, I think that was the basis of one of the reissues.
One of the reissues, yeah, right, exactly.
Now, from what I understand, there were 100 records that at one point were lost and then recovered. And that's all it is. They were lost and then recovered at a later date. Do you recall the story behind that loss and recovery?
Santa Dog Records?
Yes.
That's kind of familiar to me. There were because all the covers didn't get printed, there were about 100 to 150 sets of records that just kind of sat around for a long time. And I mean, I could see how maybe those got replaced. Those would be given out to people as to friends at times, or sold or whatever. Of those, there's only about a dozen of those left, maybe 15, something like that.
Yeah. I understand that there's a special series of handmade boxes that the Cryptic Corporation has. Is that true?
There are. There is a guy who's like a woodworker. His name is Dustin, and he lives up in the foothills of the Sierras. And Dustin has did some incredibly beautiful boxes of the remaining 15. How many of those were left? And of course, we have those. He also did, a nice set of boxes. There are some box sets of first pressings of the first 10 albums, and he did a really beautiful wood carving box for those too. I mean, hey, that's the guy we should have had back in the 70s, when we were.
Okay. So there's still a dozen or so Santa Dog box sets in the wooden case. What's the plan for those? Any idea what's going to happen to those?
There's no plan at this point. I've been giving thought recently to doing like an auction once a month, because I have a lot of really unique collectibles around here, and something like that would be kind of the kind of items that I would auction off.
Okay. Santa Dog is obviously very popular in the collectibles field. At what point did the band recognize that there was demand for records like Santa Dog and Meet the Residents? As I understand, in the early days, it was hard to actually give them away. I think there were 40 copies of Meet the Residents sold in the first year. So at what point did the band recognize that collector, that appreciation tide was starting to turn in their favor?
We'll be back after these messages.
There's no doubt about it. Record collecting has become a serious hobby and even an investment for many around the world. So record collectors have to ask themselves how best to protect their prized records and confidently buy and sell with others. There is an option to consider: vintage media grading at vmgvinyl.com. vmgvinyl.com will professionally grade your record and encase it in protective plastic, so your record will retain its value for decades to come. This is the same approach that comic book and sports card collectors have done for years. Now, I know many record collectors will be horrified with the thought of having their records graded and encased in plastic. And for the majority of records, this isn't necessary. But if you have top dollar records that you need to protect, maybe a super rare album that's languishing on the shelf, a one-off misprint, or a special LP that you want to protect, look up vmgvinyl.com, Vintage Media Grading, and see if this service is right for you. That's Vintage Media Grading, vmgvinyl.com.
Hey everyone, I'm here to talk to you about Seams Easy record sleeve repair strips. Ever find a record in a used bin where the vinyl is gorgeous, but the sleeve has this ugly split and is even falling completely apart? Well, that's okay. Grab it anyway, because with Seams Easy record sleeve repair strips, you can fix that right up. Seams Easy record repair strips repair seam splits from the inside, so it doesn't affect the appearance of a record sleeve, but it does make it functional again. With Seams Easy, records can now slide in and out like new. Turn a $5 record into a $25 functioning collectible. Just ask your local record shop for Seams Easy strips, and if they're not in stock, go to seamseasy.com. That's Seams Easy with 2 Z's. Seams Easy record sleeve repair strips. Seems easy because it is. Oh, and hey, record nerds, don't forget to clean your records with the very best and safest record cleaner, the Groove Washer. Make your records look and sound their very best and store them with confidence using the new Groove Washer Groove Guard record sleeves. You gotta try this out. It makes a huge difference to the quality of your vinyl experience. Ask for the Groove Washer by name at your local record store and accept no substitutes. Or head over to groovewasher.com and use discount code VINYLGUIDE10.
All hail the Groove Washer.
That's groovewasher.com, discount code VINYLGUIDE10.
Now we return to the program, already in progress.
No limits.
Santa Dog is obviously very popular in the collectibles field. At what point did the band recognize that there was demand for records like Santa Dog and Meet the Residents? As I understand, in the early days, it was hard to actually give them away. I think there were 40 copies of Meet the Residents sold in the first year. So at what point did the band recognize that collector, that appreciation tide was starting to turn in their favor?
There was a major article, I think it was in NME, New Music Express, sometime around the late 70s or almost the late 70s. The writer, who's a writer of note, I can't remember his name right now. He did this review of Meet the Residents, Third Reich and Roll, and Fingerprints, and it was 2 5-star and 1 4-star review, all in one review. And it's like at that point, up to that point, they couldn't give those things away. I mean, there was one store in San Francisco, I think, that carried them, and this guy happened to go into that store and found those. And soon as that happened, they were flying out the door. I mean, all these little stores in the UK and then Europe, everybody wanted stuff at that point, and they totally took off.
Yeah, as I understand, the band and members of the Cryptic Corporation had boxes of these unsold records in their apartments and their homes for years.
Yeah, I mean that first studio of the Residents, the one that I was talking about on Sycamore Street, there was one bedroom that was nothing; it was just full of boxes of records, and they did 1,000 Meet the Residents, 1,000 Third Reich and Rolls, and by the time they got to Fingerprints, they only did 500 because they didn't have room for another 1,000.
Was there a question back in the day before the tide turned that, whether to continue with the Residents? I mean, it seemed to be a lot of energy being put into product that at the time wasn't appreciated.
Well, I mean, that was true. I mean, the Residents have always existed in sort of a vacuum to a great extent. But, what happened around that time was that punk and new wave came along. And so, the Residents certainly were never punk. They had some punkish things like Satisfaction or whatever, but they were never really punk. But the new wave was almost like anything goes. And so ultimately, for the first time, they had a category that they fit into, and that things really kind of changed at that point.
Just really quickly on Meet the Residents, the Beatles parody cover. You were the artist behind that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was really a consultant with them. This was pre-Cryptic Corporation. I wasn't officially involved, but at the same time, I was the consultant with them. While I had always been a graphics guy and had known them for years and years before, and we had reconnected back in San Francisco, and so like I say, that I was the one that really kind of led them to. That was printed by a local guy in San Francisco, and I was the facilitator on that.
Okay. Now, does that original artwork still exist somewhere?
There is no really original artwork on it. That was a result of the printing process. Ultimately, it came from getting as high a quality photo of the original Beatles album as possible. And the thing was, the highest quality image of that was, the American version of that was Meet the Beatles. Okay, the UK version was, I think, With the Beatles, and I think that was a black and white cover as opposed to the blue and green,
Right.
And so ultimately, the UK one was the highest quality. So we did a photo of that. And then everything was then added to that in the graphics and printing process. So there never was an original piece of artwork.
So any reproductions these days are from a picture of the 1974 cover. Okay.
Right.
Okay. I understand, and correct me if this is true or not, if you know anything, at least one member of the Beatles is said to have appreciated the parody, even keeping a copy of the album framed in their office.
Well, I don't know. I can't say that I ever heard that. The story I heard was that Dick Clark had a framed copy of Third Reich and Roll in his office. Maybe they both did. I don't know.
So Dick Clark embraced that imagery with him and the swastika and the carrot.
Well, I guess he got a chuckle out of it. I don't know.
Wow. A different time. Okay. So you'd never heard back from the Beatles on that Meet the Residents cover?
No,
Okay. All right. Going over to Third Reich and Roll. On the box set, Third Reich and Roll, there were 25 units, I think. Were all 25 completed and sold?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a dozen of them were pre-sold.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, that was a lot of the motivation for getting it done to begin with, was to the people that had actually put money out years ahead to give them product. But and then each of the residents wanted one. Each of the cryptics got one. And then there were maybe another half dozen left over, something like that kind of went out over the years.
It seems like the residents from very early on recognized the power of limiting the number of units they made. 25 box sets or so many of these, that the scarcity would drive up the collectability a bit. Did the residents or Cryptic Corporation think in those terms?
No, not really. I mean, the numbers were more dictated by the interest more than anything else. I mean, everybody to a certain extent had a awareness of the fact that the more scarce something was, the more collectable value it had. But there was never any intention of, okay, let's deliberately only do a few of these so they'll be collectible. It was more like, doing what they felt like the market would bear.
Right. Okay. And you guys had a very direct relationship with fans of the band through the mailing list. Things like, like Eskimo, there were some one-sided copies on white vinyl with fur on the label. Do you recall those?
Yeah, I do. And once again, I think that the idea of that was going to be one of those original boxes.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those kind of things that you get a bunch of people sitting around, having a beer or smoking a joint, whatever, and shit like that. It sounds like a great idea until somebody actually has to figure out how to put it together and make it work. And once again, there were a handful of those that got made, but I don't think any more of that than that.
Right.
I haven't seen one for a long time. I don't even know if I have one.
And probably in one of them boxes in your basement.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Have we seen everything we're going to see from Vileness Fats?
Yeah, pretty much. The Triple Trouble DVD Blu-ray, has a lot of Vileness Fats bonus material on it, and I think we've pretty much scraped the bottom of the barrel with that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there have been a couple of people who did an incredibly amazing job of restoring that stuff. And if you've seen the Blu-ray, you look at it and it's like, oh my God, it looks great. That's because I'm used to seeing it look like shit over the years. And even when Don Hardy was making Theory of Obscurity, he's the one. Don got incredibly interested and captivated, charmed by Vileness Fats. And there was a lot of special effects footage that was, it was originally shot on half-inch reel-to-reel black and white video, what was called industrial quality video at the time. But the residents wanted to do a lot of special effects stuff that was stop motion, and they couldn't do that with the video. So they shot a lot of that on a 16 millimeter camera. And that stuff, for the most part, had never seen the light of day. And Don transferred most, if not all of that stuff, did a pretty high quality transfer on that back in about 2015. And I think a lot of that stuff is on, like bonus stuff on Triple Trouble.
So all of the original raw footage has been backed up, and I assume the Residents' music, high resolution scans of artwork is pretty much the Residents archive now also in a digital format for future generations?
Mostly. I mean, there's so much of it. For me, in terms of artwork, I would digitize things. When something would be re-released, we needed a new cover for it. Well, I would digitize the old cover. But there are things like Cherry Red is about to come out with a American Composers Series box set, and I think a lot of that material has never been released since the original releases.
Is it difficult securing the rights for something that has been, made 20, 30 years ago?
That's Cherry Red's problem. For the most part, securing the rights to the material is not really a problem. You just have to pay for it. So that stuff, I just got an email from Richard at Cherry Red about a week ago wanting artwork to put the package together for the American Composer Series. And I didn't really have very much. The covers had been digitized and they're in great shape. But he's doing stuff like, there was a crazy movie back then that disappeared that the Residents did the soundtrack for. I'm spacing out the name for it right now. The black and white cover. I can see the cover. But anyway, that had never been digitized before.
Census Taker.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff back in that era. Also too, I have a cabinet right over here that's like this of negatives and slides. Back in the analog days of photography. I've done most of the Residents photography, and ultimately, the majority of that stuff has never been digitized. There was no reason to. I mean, if there was a reason, I would go back and digitize something, but for the most part, most of that hasn't been. So while the majority of stuff in the archive has been digitized, not all, for one reason or another, not all of it has. There's just too much, and life is ongoing.
Yeah. So a few years back, the Residents put together the UBS, the Ultimate Box Set.
Right.
And there were over 100 first releases of Residents material, all in this fridge with an original eyeball. There were 10 advertised for sale. I think one went to the Museum of Modern Art. Were any of the others sold?
There was one that was sold to a crazy person in Indiana who was a huge fan, and ultimately he paid a little bit of half of the price of it, and then his marriage broke up, and as far as I could tell, he completely went to hell. And my communication with him ended when I got about 50 or 60 abusive texts from him in one day, and I thought, okay, I'm not dealing with you anymore. But yeah, that was pretty wild. That was pretty wild.
And the mystery box. Are you able to share what was in that mystery box?
Oh, I've been given instructions not to talk about the mystery box.
The $5 million mystery box.
Okay.
Right. Fair enough. So when the Residents were when the organization was at 444 Grove Street, were there a lot of people who would drop by Grove Street to try to meet the Residents or members?
Yeah, there were. I mean, that was a period of, shall we say, high notoriety for the Residents. That was the time of the original Ralph records. So they were putting out, our Cryptic Corporation really was running the label. We were putting out stuff by other artists, and so yeah, there were people that stopped by. I remember, people would be on tour and they would come by. Lena Lovitch, David Byrne, and Brian Eno. Yeah, a lot of a lot of different people.
Is that how the special guests of the Residents commercial album came to be?
Yeah.
Artists just dropping by.
Right.
Well, was there ever any involvement between the Residents and Frank Zappa?
No, not really. No, I mean, they were certainly fans, but as far as I know, there was never really any sort of connection.
Aside from these preserved edition album packages from the Residents, are the Residents going to be continuing to tour and release new music?
Oh, there certainly will be releasing new music. How much, they just finished 2 tours, one in Europe and one in the States. They did 45 shows in 3 months. And at this point, nobody wants to talk about touring again. The thing that is being talked about, although any consideration of touring would be much more limited, but they've done several performances of their God in Three Persons album recently. They had of everything that the Residents have done, that was right at the top of the list of stuff that all of us felt like should be developed beyond just the initial album stage. So that finally happened at the Museum of Modern Art. There was a world premiere of God in Three Persons, like that far before the COVID lockdown. I mean, everybody felt so incredibly lucky that happened, because if it was for 2 weeks later, it wouldn't have happened. But me, one way or another, have been trying to get that show out other places ever since. And we did do a couple of performances in San Francisco about a year ago, and then one in LA a few months later. But recently, we've started some more conversations with a major promoter in the UK about the possibility of doing some major venues with God in Three Persons, roughly a year or so from now. So, but it would be a more limited tour. I mean, it's a very big show. It takes 15 people to put it on. It's very expensive. So that's the main reason it hasn't gone out. It takes a lot to make it work.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Especially these days as well.
Yeah.
So sounds like touring may be in the future. How about new releases? How about new music from the Residents?
The Residents are working on another album, a new album, which, they have a new collaborator on this that I can't really go into detail about, but somebody that they are extremely excited to be working with. If things went extremely well, that could come out at the end of this year. There's such a long lag time for product these days that I suspect it'll probably be early next year. And the working title for it is Dr. Dark.
Dr. Dark. And you're okay to share this on the show?
Yeah. We can say the working title. That's
Dr.
right.
Dark. How often do working titles just become the title?
Often, but certainly not always.
Okay. Fair enough. All right. So can't wait to hear more about that. Again, Homer, thank you so much for coming on the show and
sure,
tolerating my record nerd questions here. I think there's a lot of collectors that like to know these sort of details, and the Cryptic Corporation and the Residents sure know how to hold that string above us to make us jump. I want to make sure people know about the additional preserved edition album packages for the Residents, Eskimo, and the commercial album coming out on Cherry Red Records July 7th. And again, this set complements all the other preserved releases. Make sure to check those out at residence.com or cherryred.co.uk. Also, your local record store can probably order it in if they don't already have it. And again, Homer, thank you again for coming on the Vinyl Guide. We do appreciate it.
Yeah, sure, Nate. It's my pleasure.
Oh, man, absolutely fascinating. The work of the Residents is incredible, and these preserved editions are amazing, full of extra stuff, and the 2 LP versions of Eskimo and the Residents commercial album are not to be missed. Again, those can be had at cherryred.co.uk, or you get to order them in from your local record shop. And don't forget, there's an extended version of this interview available only for show patrons, patreon.com/vinyl guide. Head up there now, help support the show, and enjoy all the extras. And that is it for this episode of the Vinyl Guide. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please share these episodes on your social media pages. Put them on Facebook, tweet them out on Twitter, put them in the Reddit forums or in the Facebook groups, or share them with your record nerd friends or your buddies who know all about the Residents and want to hear more. Show them how to get this podcast on that smartphone of theirs. They'll appreciate it, and I certainly will too. We'll be back shortly with a brand new episode. So until we talk next time, get out there and buy some records, people. Cheers.
That's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Send your thoughts to Nate at thevinylguide.com or follow or tag us on Instagram at Vinyl Guide. Until next time, keep spinning.